stand by. You start on Broadway on Monday.
I got the part.
In the fall of 2019, a woman named Rena DeVos got the phone call every actor waits their whole life for. Not for a role, for a replacement. She was 34 years old, and for 11 years, she had been what people in the industry politely call a working actor, which is a nice way of saying she had been in everything and remembered by no one. Regional theater. A recurring guest spot on a medical drama that got canceled after 9 episodes. Voiceover work for a company that made ergonomic office chairs. So when her agent called and said the words standby and Broadway and starts Monday in the same sentence, Renata sat down on her kitchen floor and cried. The play was called Glass House. It had been running for 4 months to sold-out crowds and rapturous reviews, almost entirely because of its lead Chiu, a magnetic, reclusive actress named Vivian Cole, who had come out of nowhere 18 months earlier and was, by every account, about to become one of the biggest names in American theater. Renata wasn't replacing Vivian. Nobody replaced Vivian.
And in that moment, I understood.
Renata was her standby. The actor, who sits in a small dressing room every single night, in full costume and makeup, ready to go on with 15 minutes notice, in case the star can't perform. In 11 years of theater, Renata had never once heard of a standby actually going on. She would remember this later, how rare it was supposed to be. The Belasco Theater on 44th Street is old, the kind of old where the walls seem to hold on to sound a little longer than they should. Renata's dressing room was in the basement, 3 floors below the stage, at the end of a hallway that smelled like paint and dust and something faintly metallic she could never place. It had 1 mirror, ringed with bulbs, half of them burnt out, a cot, a small television bolted to the wall, tuned permanently to a closed circuit feet of the stage above, so she could watch the show every night from underground, mouthing along to lines she was memorizing in real time. The stage manager, a clipped, efficient woman named Dara, walked her through it on her first day. You'll come in 2 hours before curtain, get into hair and makeup, and then you wait, Dara said. If Vivian's fine, you go home. If she's not, you're on. Has that ever happened? Renata asked. Has a standby actually gone on for this show? Dara's face did something small and quick, a flicker, there and gone. Not for this one, she said, not yet. Renata didn't think much of it at the time. She had a job. She had insurance, for the first time in 3 years. She had a room with her name taped to the door, even if the tape was already starting to peel at one corner, like it had been put up and taken down more than once.
You'll come in 2 hours before curtain, get in hair and makeup, and you have your own.
That matches not.
Not for this one, not yet.
She noticed that detail. She just didn't ask about it. For the first 2 weeks, Renata never once saw Vivian Cole in person. She heard her every night, through the small speaker mounted above the mirror. A live feed piped down from the stage. Vivian's voice was extraordinary, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that made you lean toward the speaker without realizing you were doing it. Critics wrote entire paragraphs just about the way she said the word no in the second act. But Renata never crossed paths with her. Vivian arrived through a different entrance. She left through a different exit. The one time Renata asked another cast member, a soft-spoken older actor named Julian, who played Vivian's on-stage husband, what Vivian was like off stage. Julian had gone quiet for a second too long before answering. Private, he said finally. She keeps to herself, keeps everyone at a distance, really. Even the cast? Especially the cast. He said it lightly, like a joke, but he didn't smile when he said it, and Renata noticed that too. What she did have every night was the routine. 2 hours before curtain, she'd sit at that mirror and do her own makeup, a mirror image, almost exactly, of what was happening 1 floor above and 2 floors up, where Vivian was doing the same thing. Same character, same blocking, same 9 minutes of silence in the third act, where the entire audience was supposed to hold its breath. Renata had learned the blocking so precisely that she started dreaming it. Walking to the window at the top of page 40, turning on the word leave, sitting on the third beat after the door slams. She told herself this was diligence, professionalism. She was, after all, being paid to be ready. She didn't tell herself the other thing, not yet, that some nights, watching that small screen, she wasn't just memorizing the blocking. She was starting to memorize Vivian. It happened on a Tuesday, 6 weeks into the run. Renata was in her dressing room, 40 minutes before curtain, running lines under her breath, when Dara appeared in the doorway without knocking.
Get into costume, now!
Her face had none of its usual clipped calm. Get into costume, Dara said, now. Renata's stomach dropped and soared at the same time, that specific dizzying mix of dread and hope that she would spend a long time afterward being ashamed of. Is she sick? Just get dressed. The next 15 minutes happened to Renata rather than through her. Hands were on her, hair, makeup, the corset of the second act costume being laced too fast by an assistant whose fingers were shaking, slightly more than Renata's own. Someone was talking into a radio. Someone else was saying, "House is being held, house is being held," like a chant. And then at 12 minutes to curtain, Dara's radio crackled, and her whole body changed, shoulders dropping, breath releasing, and she said flatly, into the small dressing room, "She's here. Stand down." That was it. No explanation. Renata sat in the mirror in full costume, heart still hammering, and watched on the little screen as Vivian Cole walked onto that stage 8 minutes later and delivered a performance so precise, so devastating, that the review the next morning called it the finest work of her career, and perhaps of this decade.
And in that moment, the world ceased.
Renata sat in her basement room and applauded along with the muffled sound of the audience above her, in a costume no one had seen her wear, and felt something she didn't have a word for yet. She would find the word later. It was interchangeable. It happened again 3 weeks later, and then again 17 days after that. Each time the same choreography. A scramble, a held house, Renata dressed and ready, and standing at the mirror with her hand on the doorknob. And then always, at the last possible minute, word that Vivian had arrived, that she was fine, that the standby could stand down. Renata began to notice things she couldn't unnotice. The scrambles only ever happened on nights when a certain critic was in the house, a formidable, influential woman named Adele Fenn, whose reviews could make or end a run. Renata cross-referenced the dates against the theater's comp list, which she was not, strictly speaking, supposed to have access to, but which Dara left open on a laptop in the green room more than once. Every single scramble lined up with an Adele Fenn ticket. It could have been coincidence. Renata told herself that for a full week. Actors get nervous before important nights. Nerves make people late. It happens. But then she noticed the second pattern, and this one was harder to explain away. On every single one of those nights, the scramble nights, when Vivian finally did arrive and go on, her performance in the third act, the 9-minute silent sequence that critics raved about above all else, was different, not better, not worse, different, a different rhythm to the pauses, a slightly different angle when she turned toward the window. Small things, the kind of things only someone who had rehearsed that exact silence alone in a mirror hundreds of times would ever catch. Renata had rehearsed that exact silence alone in a mirror hundreds of times. She started to wonder very quietly, in a part of her mind she wasn't proud of, whether the person walking onto that stage in the 9-minute silence on the Fenn nights was always actually Vivian Cole.
You should start looking at the dates. That's not a denial.
It means some rooms you don't want to be the finally sees what's really in them.
She brought it to Julian on a Thursday, in the alley, behind the theater, both of them still half in costume, sharing a cigarette She didn't even smoke, just to have a reason to stand there. She laid it out carefully, the dates, the pattern, the small differences in the silence. She expected him to laugh at her. Part of her wanted him to. He didn't laugh. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer at all. Then he said, "You should stop looking at the dates. That's not a denial. It's not a confirmation either." He took the cigarette from her, even though it had gone out. "You have a good job. You're good at it. My advice, as someone who has been doing this for 26 years, do the job in front of you. Don't go looking for the job behind the job." "What does that mean?" He looked at her for a moment, with something that might have been pity, or might have been fear for her, or might have been fear for himself. "It means some rooms," he said. "You don't want to be the one who finally sees what's really in them." Then he flicked the dead cigarette into the gutter and went back inside, and he never brought it up again, no matter how many times she tried. The turning point came on a night Adele Fenn was, once again, seated in row F. Renata was in costume, at the mirror, 12 minutes to curtain, waiting for the familiar radio crackle that would send her back to her street clothes and her long walk to the subway. It didn't come. At 8 minutes to curtain, Dara appeared in the doorway, and this time her face wasn't panicked. It was something stiller.
You're on. Where's Vivian? You're on, Renata.
And stranger, resigned almost, like a person watching an outcome she'd known was coming for a long time. "You're on," Dara said. "Where's Vivian?" "You're on, Renata." There wasn't time to ask again. There wasn't time to feel the thing she'd wanted to feel for 11 years, the vindication, the arrival. There was only the stage manager's hand on her back, and the long walk up the stairs, and the sudden, enormous roar of the house lights. And then she was standing in the wings. And then she was standing in the light, and the play simply swallowed her, the way it always did in rehearsal, until she wasn't thinking about any of it anymore. She was just doing the job in front of her, exactly like Julian said. She was extraordinary. She would read that in 3 separate reviews the next morning, including Adele Fenn's, which used the word revelation. But it was the 9-minute silence, near the end of the 3rd act, that she would remember for the rest of her life, not because of how it felt to perform it, but because of what she saw during it. Standing at the window, exactly where she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times alone, she looked out past the stage lights into the dark house, the way the blocking required, and in the wings, just at the edge of where the light gave way to black, she saw a figure standing perfectly still, watching her. Not Dara, not the stage manager's assistant. A woman in a plain dark coat, arms folded, face unreadable in the dark, watching her stand in the exact spot, doing the exact silence that only someone who had also stood in that exact spot, doing that exact silence, would recognize. The lights went down for the scene change before Renata could be sure of what she'd seen. When they came back up, the wings were empty. She went to find Vivian's dressing room after the curtain call. She told herself it was to say thank you, to introduce herself finally, after 4 months of being her unseen twin, 1 floor below. The door was ajar. The room was empty, but the mirror lights were on, and on the counter, next to a bouquet of flowers with no card, was a stack of photographs Renata hadn't been meant to see. They were headshots, dozens of them, not of Vivian, of Renata. Every audition photo, every regional theater program, every awkward promotional still from the canceled medical drama, years of her career, printed and stacked and annotated in small, careful handwriting. In the margins, notes about her voice, her walk, the particular way she held her hands when she was nervous. At the bottom of the stack was a single sheet of paper, and on it, in that same careful handwriting, was a list of dates. Every scramble night, every held house, every night Adele Fenn had been in row F, and beside each date, 1 word, repeated down the page like a countdown. Ready, 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 ready. The last date on the list hadn't happened yet. It was tomorrow's performance. Renata never got a clear answer about what she'd found that night. or who had really been walking onto that stage during certain silences, or whether the woman in the dark coat in the wings had been Vivian Cole watching her own understudy for the first time, or someone else entirely watching to see if the standby was finally, truly ready. What she does know is this: she never went back to that dressing room. She called her agent the next morning and said she couldn't do the show anymore, and when he asked why, all she could say was that the room felt wrong, and that some things you're better off not being ready for. Glass House closed 11 months later, ending its run as one of the most acclaimed plays of the decade. Vivian Cole never gave another interview after the closing night. She has not appeared on a stage since. Renata Voss went back to regional theater. She has never told this story publicly before tonight. When asked, years later, why she left a role most actors would have killed for, she gave the same answer every time. "I got the part," she said. "That was never the problem. The problem was figuring out how long I'd already had it, without anyone telling me."
I got the part. That was never the problem. The problem was figuring out how long I'd already had it without anyone telling me.